Does life imitate art? Does art imitate life? Take a look in the mirror to find the true answer. You're listening to Themes and Memes, a different kind of movie review. I'm your host, Aaron, and here with me is my co-host, Adam. How you doing today, Adam?
Yeah, not bad, Aaron. Good to be back. It's going to be, I suppose, a slightly different subject matter we'll be dealing with today, but also kind of similar in a lot of ways to some of the other films we've done recently. So, yeah.
The movie itself is stylistically different than anything we've ever covered, for sure, but the similarities that exist would be the fact that this was another biopic. So, Steve Jobs, 2015 film, up for Oscar nominations for this film, so another Oscar film like we did last month. And so the phenomenon of the biopic we'll continue talking about here. And what do you have to say about this film, Adam?
Yeah, well, it was a little bit different than what I'd expected. There are a few of these films that have been coming out in the past few years, ever since Steve Jobs died, I think back in 2011. But there's been a few different kind of like docudramas, biopics, films about his life and that kind of thing. So this is one of those, but it seems to be, from what I can see anyway, like probably the most popular one. It's the one that's been sort of like most well promoted. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, the big Oscar nominations and all that. Yes, this is the famous one. And I actually watched another, I think it's just called Jobs. It was like the made-for-TV movie with Ashton Kutcher playing the role of Steve Jobs. So I watched that as well. I kind of was just comparing the two films, and they're definitely two very different films. But definitely the fact that in the wake of Steve Jobs' death in 2011, there were a lot of films just made in a fairly short amount of time. And again, just the phenomenon of the biopic popping up once somebody has left. Somebody dies and a biopic emerges. And I suppose maybe today, in a world where everything happens so fast, just everything, you've got these biopics kind of happening right away, too, because I guess that's the way the world works now. Is that a silly thing to say, or what do you have to say about that?
I absolutely agree. I mean, it's almost like, as soon as somebody does die, the whole Hollywood movie machine kicks into gear. It's like, right, we've got some subject material to deal with here. It's almost like we'll get at least a few films out of this one.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't go as far as to say they're waiting for him to die, but I think that the entertainment industry probably anticipates people's death a lot of the time, and they're preparing. And they know someound going to die, then they can make a film. They're kind of like, right, okay, let's get on with this.
Yeah.
We can do something here.
Yeah, kind of sad. And again, I mean, I was mentioning my personal opinions on biopics, not the last show, but in the Doors show that we did. And I really have a distaste for them. They don't set well with me because of this and other similar reasons. It becomes the story of a person's life to the average viewer and all that. But at the same time, with this film, the Steve Jobs film, for some reason it didn't bother me as much as these movies can. If that makes sense. Do you feel the same way or totally different, Adam?
Well, I guess similar, I suppose, in that this particular one was less about his personal life in terms of like his upbringing, his experiences, growing up, his personal life. I mean, there were threads relating to his personal life which were definitely part of the film, but it was more focused on like I suppose the business corporate aspect of what he did. So it was pretty much the entire film. I mean, there are like 3 acts in the film, and they're to do with 3 of the major product launches. And essentially the film was just basically like a behind the scenes, backstage, expose of kind of like what went on, at each of these product launches. And so the entire thing's really about, I suppose, the business side of it in a lot of ways, not so much about I mean, again, the personality and the personal life are definitely important threads, but they're not really the primacy of the film. The primacy of the film is about, what happened in terms of the milestones of the company and how he was involved with that. So I guess for that reason, it's kind of, it's about maybe a little bit less annoying because, well, they're not, in this film, and I have to say this, they don't really go out of their way to mythologize him as much as you might expect.
Yeah.
They're showing him with warts and all. It's the good, the bad, and the ugly. The things that he excelled at, the things that he failed at. His pros and cons, and all the rest of it. So I guess, not quite as annoying as something like The Doors.
It's odd that you say all that, because I have to say that I kind of disagree in that I felt that it was mostly about his personality, this film, and his personal relationships with his daughter, especially. It gets into that, which the TV version kind of hinted at it, but it didn't. I mean, in the end, you know me, I jump to the end of the film at the beginning every time. But in the end, it kind of like leaves with Jobs and Lisa's relationship, and throughout the film, it shows that, and his very strong personality, which he did have. And I guess that would be the question here, to what degree is that depiction of that personality real, and how much of it is sensationalized, etc. But certainly he did have an intense personality, and that's brought to the fore here. And the film is very talky, very dialogue-driven. It's a lot of people talking really fast, like the whole time. So it's,
a lot of quips,
yeah,
lots of quips.
constantly talking, and it's like, whoa, and there's a good bit of psychodrama, and it's some of it has to do, I mean, because it's set backstage. It's one part Steve Jobs just psyching himself up to go on stage, so it makes sense that the stronger parts of his personality come out. But yeah, I don't know. I thought it was very much about his personal life.
Well, maybe I can qualify what I just said then, and I guess because that's absolutely true. And so I guess what I mean to say is, it's less about his personality as it is about how his personality interacted with his business life and things like that. So I guess it's like, yes, it's about his personality very much so, but it's in the context of how his personality, affected, the growth of Apple and his personal relationships. So I'm not sure if that makes any sense, but I do agree with what you're saying there, because it is. It is really about this big personality.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's what made and broke Jobs throughout the years. His big successes, and then in the middle there, the trouble years for Apple and for himself when the board let him go. And then he comes back triumphantly in the late 90s and creates the iMac, and everything. It goes up from there. So it shows all of that, and there's so much to Steve Jobs' career. And just a note on him, and just successful people like him in general. Jobs was a guy that, as a young man at college age, he's very much into Eastern mysticism and Zen Buddhism and all these things. He's very much getting into those things, and the fruitarian diet, which he held on to the vegan diet throughout his life. But he was very much into those things. And then he goes and becomes this intense entrepreneurial guy with completely unchecked ambition. And there's definitely a dichotomy there, because, the core of Buddhism is that the idea that desire is the root of all
suffering.
Yeah, all suffering. That's right. Desire is the root of all suffering. So, I mean, that's the whole of it, really. That's the beginning and ending of it. And then you've got this guy who is very much into that. But then he goes and becomes this successful business guy where, again, unchecked ambition, there's no stopping him, very much following his desires and things like that. So there's definitely a dichotomy to Steve Jobs, and that much is there for sure. I mean, we can certainly draw that out, and I don't know what you have to say about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think... I don't know exactly how accurate, this portrayal in the film is supposed to be. I mean, there have been there was some contention over that. Like I think Stephen Wozniak said that it's kind of fairly accurate, but not entirely. Then you had Max Scully saying it's again, they're accurate in some ways, but they're portraying him as much more like unkind and ruthless than he really was. But I think what we're talking about here, at least as far as the film goes, is someone who was probably in a lot of like deep personal conflict, because one of the things they mention in the film is how Steve Jobs was actually adopted at birth. And he had a sense of abandonment, obviously, and that the idea was that his need to control everything and to make people, I suppose, like him or want to be around him was out of a like a sense of powerlessness that came from that. So you've got these these kind of two conflicting kind of influences in his personality. So you've got the extremely like the personality type really that's pretty much always required to achieve that level of success in like corporate enterprise and stuff, which is always highly competitive, technical aptitude of some kind, and then a huge ego as well. So you've got that sort of ruthless, ambitious, driven aspect of him, and then perhaps his kind of his desire to kind of counteract that in some way. The conflict internally maybe resulted in this interest in like Eastern mysticism. I mean, he traveled to India and stuff like that, and he did like he was into the hippie scene, which is another interesting little nugget there. But the Zen Buddhism, as you say, the sort of the being detached from troublesome emotions, from desire, from lust, from the appetites, from
all
hate,
things
fear,
worldly.
all those types of things.
Yes.
All things worldly. Yeah, all things worldly. Exactly. Yeah. So I think perhaps that that's maybe what we were looking at there. Is this a conflict within him?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's definitely. I went into this movie kind of having expectations, I guess, and it exceeded expectations in that it was just different than what I thought it would be. Again, very dialogue driven, very fast paced dialogue, like talking so fast, and everything was a conversation, and you're trying to follow it. I found it actually kind of hard to follow at times. It might have been because I was tired, but I found it like kind of hard just because it's so fast paced. Even I don't know.
Well, I'm not sure whether this was the same for you, but the copy that I got had hard coded subtitles on it. So there was subtitles, and they weren't just like your average subtitles that go along the bottom. The subtitles actually appeared at different points in the screen, so it would sort of they would appear over the person that was talking, and you'd have sort of like subtitles on the right and subtitles on the left. So this was, I think, deliberately written into the film in order to make it easier, I think, for the audience to keep up, because as you say, the dialogue is so fast, it's so quippy and witty and kind of slick, that they're using so much like corporate and like technological jargon that I think without those it would be hard to keep up, and even with those it was kind of hard to keep up. So, yeah.
How about this idea? No matter what, in the end, this movie, no matter who would have produced it, in the end, it has to paint Jobs in some kind of positive light. And it does. The film does end up that way. The production company that made this was Universal. And Universal is a division of like NBC, Comcast, and all that. When it comes to Jobs, he is definitely connected to the entertainment industry in that he was the guy who bought Pixar from George Lucas in the 80s, and then he ended up striking it big in when Toy Story came out. He made like $1.5 billion. He had to kind of hold out to get to that point, but it was basically due to the fact that Disney latched on to Pixar, and they were the ones that really pulled through for the big success and made that happen. And I believe Jobs' wife owns a very huge amount of stock in Disney even to this day. But anyway, there's the Disney-Pixar connection to Jobs. I just think it would have been interesting had it been like a Disney production. Maybe it would have been like over-the-top positive for Jobs. And this is just a weird speculation, but I don't know. Any thoughts on any of that stuff, Adam?
Um, I mean, I guess so. I mean, again, I kind of did expect it, like a lot of these biopics, to be that way, in that it was, overly positive, and it was all about mythologizing, this guy, and just kind of, if not whitewashing, at least just kind of glossing over some of the more negative aspects of his personality and his life. But because it wasn't, made by them, it was Danny Boyle, I think, directed this one. Yeah, it was much more nuanced. There was a lot of gray areas, and there were a lot of a lot of portrayals of at times a pretty nasty character, to be honest.
Yeah.
And from what I've read over the years, and this is just little anecdotes here and there, but this is something I definitely remembered when watching the film. Is these scenes where they show him being like really ruthless and cold, especially towards his own family, and overly ambitious, etc. I did recall like reading like lots of little anecdotes over the years that talked about how this was the most difficult aspect of his personality for people to deal with, and that it actually caused them a lot of trouble over the years. That he did have a tendency towards sort of like being overly competitive and aggressive, and just kind of walking over people, and being a real being kind of a bit of a diva, I suppose, as well.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, I think this film lent more in that direction in terms of kind of a more of a balanced portrayal than it might have been had it been somebody else making it.
Like a Disney affiliated group. I think it would have been good if it was just a Pixar movie. That could be a good Pixar film. Something different.
Like an animation one?
Yeah, an animated film, yeah. Oh, goodness. Anything that struck you about, anything that you want to mention about this film in particular, Adam?
Well, there's lots of little notes and sort of nuggets that I've taken note of here. I think, I suppose, starting at the beginning, really, I think I just want to go back to the whole question of him being born in San Francisco in the late 50s, growing up, throughout the 60s and 70s, around the same time as the whole birth of the Laurel Canyon scene. So when all the hippie, countercultural, drug culture stuff was going on and was really, blossoming, he was in his formative years at that time.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, they were one of the most kind of famous quotes that people attribute to him. And, obviously he did say this, was that taking LSD was one of the best and most important experiences of his life. And so it's interesting that it's interesting to note that fact, in that he grew up in this period of counterculture and change, and he was experimenting with Eastern mysticism, with psychedelics, and that this also ties in with again the Laurel Canyon thing, and not just that, but a lot of the other programmers and engineers behind the computer revolution that also came out of that area. So I mean, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with this, but there's a great documentary called Das Netz, which it's basically about the Unabomber and the sort of the birth of the internet and the computer revolution. And it basically talks about how all these programmers and engineers came out of California and were into hippie culture and were inspired, in regards to developing computer networks and personal computing and all this stuff. They were inspired in many ways by the hippie counterculture of that time. And so, yeah, I think Steve Jobs, could be put in that category, which I think is interesting. He was into he was a huge fan of Bob Dylan. I think he dated Joan Baez for a period of time. Is that right?
Oh, really? No, I didn't know about that. Maybe, yeah, could have.
Well, there was a mention of it in the film. There was some little bit of script that mentioned Joan Baez, and I'm pretty sure that I've read somewhere else that they dated for at least a short period of time anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think it's all very interesting. But again, we've got the kind of conflict going on between the on one hand, the gentle kind of hippie, countercultural Buddhist who's a vegan, and who's into psychedelics and all that stuff, and then the sort of aggressive, corporate, ambitious entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So
yeah, definitely. I know that you sent me that documentary about the Unabomber long ago, and I watched it, and it's excellent. The ties to almost the whole of like the Silicon Valley tech world, and
Yeah,
especially in the early days of being connected to the hippie world.
yeah.
So many connections to be made there. Who, like the merry pranksters, right? The guys in the bus. Weren't they?
Um,
Do you remember that group? Those guys?
Not. I mean, you maybe jog my memory, and I might.
Well, the problem with me is I've only vaguely remember, but I remember that those guys were tech guys of some sort, and they have this project
Oh
where they're
yeah,
driving
yeah,
around in this bus, and if not just taking LSD, I think they're giving it out to people and
yeah,
things like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I
Yeah,
just
that was interesting. That was all about like again, tying the whole concept of personal computers and computer networks into the whole hippie thing. It's
yeah
I think what you're talking about there was like the social experiments that these guys were into.
yes
So it was
yeah
to do with music, it was to do with sociology, it was to do with culture, drugs, but it was also to do with computers and
yeah
connectedness and
yeah
all these ideas. So I think again a lot of the stuff was influenced by that.
definitely yeah and. Some of the sort of turn of the millennium and millennial ideas and new age ideas certainly factor into all this too. And you've got, like the Esalen Institute people that ties into this, and just this sort of the new agey idea that
Mm,
consciousness in general is expanding, and that the technology that's being created is a vehicle for that expanse, and even like a new medium for consciousness to jump into. The
yeah,
transhuman idea, of course, we're going to live in computers,
yeah,
so it's this new spiritual realm. And it sounds like it sounds like really whacked out, especially before the fact of all these technologies being created. But as they are being created, as more and more of them become a reality, becomes even more tangible. So you've got this metaphysical, alchemical thing going on where the intangible, metaphysical, spiritual ideal is being made in the real world, and again, the medium is the technological medium, where it is an actual machine, but it's a machine that has that it interfaces with human consciousness, and it has an intangible quality to it, and it can create a world, an intangible world that becomes real. So trippy, to say the
yeah,
least,
yeah.
right?
Well,
Yeah.
you know what that reminds me of is actually the very first scene of the film, and what that is it's footage of Arthur C. Clarke in the
Yes, that's right.
1960s,
That's right.
and he's got it's like some kind of like technology expo or something, and so he's standing there with this big one of these old computers that's just like the size of a room or something, and he's talking to some father who's there with his son about the coming computer revolution, and he's basically explaining that your son, when he's growing up, the world that he's going to live in is going to be all about computers. He's going to interact with the world through computers. He's going to basically run his whole life through computers.
And he's going to take it for granted as well.
And
He
he'll take it.
mentions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the computer will be something that's small, compact, convenient, user friendly. It'll be it'll be just a piece of furniture almost. It'll be
Yeah.
part of the scenery for him. Again, taking it for granted,
Yeah.
and you'll completely depend on it. And what was interesting is that in that particular little bit of footage there, that shows how this father is questioning Arthur C. Clarke and is saying, well, I can't remember exactly how he put it, but it was something along the lines of, well, what are the larger ramifications of this? I kind of have some misgivings about the whole idea of humanity interacting through computers and being so dependent upon computers. And Arthur C. Clarke is basically saying, well, we will certainly lose some things along the way, but what we'll gain is going to make it all worthwhile. So,
Yeah.
that idea was definitely was I suppose quite alien to people,
Yes.
before it actually happened. It was a very strange idea, but then as as the Silicon Valley thing took off, and as I think the counterculture of the 1960s started to influence the way people thought, in so many different respects, this became, I suppose, more palatable.
Yes.
People could get their heads around it a bit more, and of course, again, getting back to places like these New Age research institutes in California, like Aspen and Esalen, and all these types of places. We've got like people like Terence McKenna as well, who always talked about how computers would represent the next leap in the evolution of consciousness. And so, again, before, it's exactly like you say, before it actually happened, it was almost hard to conceptualize. But then as it started happening, it all appeared to become some kind of natural progression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny how Arthur C. Clarke just so matter-of-factly says those things, too,
Yeah.
as if he knew it for a fact. That's how he's putting it forth.
Well, I mean, this ties into the next thing I was probably going to bring up, and I think this would be interesting to talk about, is that the film is essentially a Masonic film in a lot of ways. I feel. Sure. Did you get that? Or?
I want to hear how you think so.
Well, first of all, and this is, I guess, tangential and kind of, I don't know, circumstantial, but. For a start, it starts out with Arthur C. Clarke. There are references to 2001, Space Odyssey, which is a Masonic film about the technology and revolution of humankind and all that kind of stuff.
And evolution to the next level and all that.
Yeah, ascension to the next level. Yeah, exactly. So you've got that. So it starts out with that, which is interesting enough. And then he's talking about this whole, idea of the personal computer revolution, how it's going to change the world. You've then got as the film follows through, you've got this, the personal computer becoming, like more and more advanced, and so much of the dialogue has to do with revolution and about building something new. I also, get a little bit of the Masonic kind of element through just the sort of process that or the personal journey that Jobs goes through, and that he's all about, he sees himself as being imperfect, and he is actually insecure, and that he does actually admit that he says he's poorly made at one point.
Yeah, that's right.
And there are just so many little bits of dialogue or little bits of script throughout the film where he's talking about how he is imperfect, how the world is imperfect, and how there's even jokes about how he is God,
Yeah, that's you're right. He throws in a lot of biblical stuff, just like out of nowhere, like some sort of Bible reference.
Yeah. And so it continues on with him and some of the people around him talking about basically reshaping the world, at least reshaping the computer industry, reshaping how people live, building something new, perfecting that which was left imperfect. You've also got, the process where he is fired from Apple and then comes back. So there's kind of a death and rebirth thing going on there, I felt, with the hero, the martyr, the sun god, whatever. Going through that process, and I guess
it's funny how that when he's fired, it's out. You see windows to outside, and it's a dark and stormy night. So the dark night of the soul has been
the dark night of the soul
has come in. Yeah, because I really doubt that in real life, whatever they gave him the boot, that it was rainy and dark out like that.
Yeah. Well, I suppose one of the other little notes that I took in regard to this is how a lot of the key decisions and important discussions about the future of Apple and the path they were taking and all these big sort of milestones were held between him and Max Scully, and usually in kind of shadowy locations. It was always like just them talking quietly backstage somewhere, and Max Scully would always just appear. The conspirator, exactly. He was kind of like the senior kind of advisor or handler or something. He constantly was just. I mean, you never saw them at like board meetings or anything. He was always just appearing out of the shadows and sort of giving Jobs a bit of guidance or pointing in a certain direction.
Yeah.
And he was very rarely. You very rarely saw Steve Jobs and Max Scully with other people. It was always they were just by themselves.
Sure, it was a private thing, between them. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah.
So I guess these are kind of they're tangential, kind of anecdotal, but yeah, I felt there was like a kind of a Masonic thing going on there. I don't know whether Jobs himself was a Mason. I do know that Wozniak was a Mason, or is a Mason at least.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean it's speculation. So as to where Jobs stands on that.
Yeah. Well, without a doubt, Steve Jobs is a guy who understands occult ideas. I remember watching a couple of his like little keynote speeches and his product launches, and he just like in his presentation, he would mention occult concepts. It's like, whoa, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about here. I remember there's one where he's talking about the hand. He's getting into like the magical powers of the hand and how it interacts with whatever product it was that he was pitching. I'm like, oh boy, this guy knows what he's talking about here.
Yeah.
And there was a film years ago called Pirates of Silicon Valley. I think it was a made-for-TV movie. I'm not sure, but anyway, it focused, half of the movie kind of focused on Jobs, half of it on Bill Gates. But they very much brought this out in that film, that Jobs was sort of like this occult magician kind of guy, and he knew that, and he was also this guy kind of like that got off, or in the movie it's depicted this way, that he got off on controlling other people, and there were scenes with him like saying like, look, these people want to be controlled, and I'm the guy to do it. It's been so long since I've seen the movie, so I vaguely remember it, but I remember that pretty clearly. I know that was brought out there. Yeah, so whatever Jobs' affiliations were, he understood occult ideas without a doubt.
Well, you know what that reminds me of is that there's a scene in the film where I think it's him and it might have been Wozniak, it might have been Scully, I can't remember. He was talking to somebody and they're sitting in a big theater before one of these big product launches, getting ready, and he says something along the lines of, I think it's Wozniak brings up the fact that Steve Jobs isn't actually a programmer and he doesn't actually do it like practical engineering. And he said, it's like, well, how did you get here? How do you do this? You're not actually you're not actually a technician in computing. So how come you're leading this whole thing? And Steve Jobs says to him, he says, look, your job is to play an instrument. My job is to conduct the orchestra.
Yeah.
And so, there's a kind of, I don't know what you'd call it. Maybe a slightly occult, maybe.
Well, music.
Controlling.
Yeah, the idea of music.
Well, creation. Yeah.
Yeah, music creation.
It's kind of an alchemical thing there. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, Jobs went on to revolutionize the way that the music market works, and the digital sales of music and all that. So it could be seen as kind of like a reference to that in a, again, tangential kind of way, but definitely something that happened there. And and along the Masonic lines, the sacrifice of oneself for the greater work of whatever it is you did. And Jobs is well known for that. There's quite a few quotes from him saying like, I have my work and I throw myself into that and I love it. This is what I do and I don't want to do anything else. And apparently he didn't really do anything else. He just kind of he would work and he'd go home and he'd go back into work on weekends. And it makes sense that he would be like that. Being the successful guy that he was, you kind of just have to be that sort of person that just completely devoted to your work.
I think this was something that was actually brought out quite well in the film, and that to be on that level, in terms of again, like corporate entrepreneurship, I think that you really do have to live and breathe your work, and this is clearly depicted in the film because he doesn't do anything else. I mean, obviously, the film isn't necessarily about his personal life outside of work, but you obviously get a strong impression that this is all he does because it's all he ever talks about. It's basically, it is his entire life.
You know what just struck me is the whole relationship between him and Lisa, his daughter, that at first he refused admitting the fact that he was the father of her. Even though the courts ruled that he was the father, he would still steadfastly refuse paternity. He'd say, no, I'm not the father. Yes, I'll pay child support because I have to because of the courts, but look, that's not my child. And, she got to be fairly old. She's getting 4 years old, and he was still saying that. So it's kind of like an extreme example of what can go wrong, even if you perhaps if you take that ideal of living your work too far. Uh, in that, okay, yes, you have to be a hard worker, and the work comes first, but Steve Jobs even took that a little bit too far, and here's a warning about that. Like, yes, you got to be a hard worker, but maybe it's not best to repeat what Steve Jobs did in this sense. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, the film is replete with these. I suppose you call them warnings, where first we're shown the scene where he is denying paternity for his daughter, and even though they've got DNA tests, he's saying no, it's wrong, it can't be me. And throughout the film, there's so many other scenes where he's presented with a situation where he's really should be taking responsibility and fronting up, and he's just trying to avoid it at all costs. I mean, he eventually kind of gets talked into it, and basically all he does is just give them money.
He just throws money. I'm like, hey, here you go buy a house.
Yeah, like he just throws money. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, there's so many of these scenes where the average person watching would go, hey, man, you need to slow down with this, with the business here, and pay some attention to what I suppose really matters in life, family, etc. And he doesn't, and it's funny how that relationship is carried throughout the film, and how the relationship issues are not, I don't want to say resolved, but they're kind of presented as being resolved at the very end of the film.
Yes, yeah.
And that's something that I found a little bit glib.
Yeah, sure.
Because, I mean, just to quickly touch on that, I mean, again, we've got this daughter who was initially disowned by Steve Jobs. He's made a whole bunch of public disparaging comments about the mother and all this type of stuff, and she has been vying for attention her whole life, and he's been very distant, and has just basically given her money and tried to distance himself from her. I mean, they have a relationship in some ways, but it's emotionally disconnected. And so this, continues on, and basically at the very end of the film, there's a big drama. She wants to go to college, and they'd had an argument, and Steve Jobs says, "I'm not paying your tuition fees because your mother sold the house that I bought, and I'm not happy about it," and blah blah blah. And this turns into a big row, and it's eventually resolved by Steve Jobs kind of confronting her and just saying, "Look, I was poorly built. I'm not a very good," basically saying, "I'm not a very good father. I'm not a very good person. And so I'm just going to give you money."
And that's where the reference to being poorly built was. So again, it was like a Masonic message, even perhaps. Hey, look, this is where I was poorly built, and if I was better, then things would have been right on. Things would have been right on course. We made this huge company. Everything's great with that, and I would have had a decent family life. But it didn't go that way, did it?
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's again, I think that was I had some questions about the inferences at the very end there, where they bring on this they bring in this very evocative, warm, fuzzy music, and it's probably one of the only points in the film where they actually do that. They actually bring on this very I don't know what you'd call it. Just sort of warm, fuzzy, heartfelt kind of pop music or whatever. And really trying to evoke a sense of, look, they're finally resolving their emotional issues together, and we can all rest now because Steve Jobs has sorted out his family life. It's very superficial. It's just this daughter of his has been pretty much.
That's the way the films work, though. You have to have resolution in the end, and if it's going to be cornball and not true to life, well, so be it. That's the format you're dealing with. And again, a problem with biopics is that you have to craft a movie that way, and then so things get lost in translation from real life to film, just by the nature of film. No way around it.
Well, there's that aspect of it, and then there's also the fact that Steve Jobs, in this film at least, is quite clearly a narcissist.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the way that he expresses any kind of any sentiments to do with loving somebody else and caring for them are usually through his own narcissistic kind of agendas. And so what we're shown towards the end of the film is how he kind of, I suppose, rekindles or resolves the conflict with his daughter by, telling her that her little sort of drawings as a child have influenced some of the aesthetic design of Apple, and then he has this little what's supposed to be kind of like a brainwave, where she's listening to a Walkman, and he tells her that the Walkman's clunky, and he's going to make a new device which is going to put 1,000 songs right in her pocket. So he's obviously talking about the iPod there.
It showed her with a Walkman throughout the movie to make that point. Yeah.
Yeah. So the kind of the nearest we get to any kind of emotional resolution through with the narcissist Steve Jobs is him basically saying, well, look, I'll do something within my corporate life that may please you. How about that?
Well, of course, there was the Lisa computer that was a real project. That was real, and he named it after her. I mean, he must have.
Well, he admits to that.
He did admit to that. Okay.
At the very end, he admits it. Yeah.
Yeah, but do you know if he ever did admit to that in real life? I think that must be the case. I'd be surprised if it wasn't.
I don't know, but again, I'd be surprised if they'd put that in the film and it wasn't true. So
yeah, that's a clear example from real life that we can see. Like, yeah, he was denying paternity to Lisa, but at the same time, he had this project at work that was named Lisa. So
again, that kind of gets into the emotionally disconnected narcissist who can't quite handle having a real daughter, a real human being creation.
So that's his way of making up for it. Look, I'll make a great product, and that'll make it okay.
Yeah, exactly. So, I can't deal with the flesh and blood aspect of creation and responsibility and fatherhood, so I'm just going to make myself a little surrogate, and I'm going to call it Lisa, and it's going to be a computer. So I've kind of done my job, right?
Yeah, and this is brought up in a film where young Lisa, I think she's 4 at the time, asks, "Oh yeah, you named the computer after me?" He says, "No, it's just a coincidence. Lisa stands for Line Interface Systems Algorithm or something like that." And he says, "It's just a coincidence. Like, there's no connection." And then later in the film, he goes, "Oh," when they've made up, of course, at the end, and he's like, "Yeah, of course I named it after you. That acronym doesn't even mean anything anyway.
Yeah.
I just made that up to fit your name."
Yeah.
I don't. Well, I mean, without a doubt, I mean, you look at the real life of Jobs, and there's so many sad aspects to it. I mean, certainly just his young death being prominent among them, and then you've got all these, these personal issues and things like that. But I don't know. Any thoughts on the real Steve Jobs?
The real? Well, yeah. I mean, I suppose the way to look at it, because I haven't read the actual biography or seen any other movies about him, but I suppose the probably the best way to look at it in this respect would be just looking at the legacy that he's created, and that being some kind of reflection of who he was. And it's interesting because one of the other little aspects that I wanted to bring up was I guess the cult of Apple, I suppose. What he's actually created, because it's. I mean, I think most people listening would agree that for a lot of people, Apple is more than just a brand. It's almost like a lifestyle choice in a lot of ways. Obviously,
brilliant marketing, without a doubt.
I mean, it's probably the best marketing that I can think of, really. I mean, if you think about the Apple logo, and again, just a quick side note, there's another biblical reference there. I mean, actually, I'm going to go for a quick tangent here just for the sake of it. But one thing that was brought out in the film was the fact that we all obviously have assumed that when we're looking at the Apple logo with a bite out of it, we're talking about the Garden of Eden, Eve biting the apple of knowledge, light, etc. Yeah. But in the film, he actually says that the apple was about Alan Turing, the British computer
Turing.
Scientist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Of which there was a recent biopic of him.
There was, exactly. Yeah, that's right.
Another film in the biopic phenomena of specifically in terms of like scientists and technology guys. There's been tons of them lately. But anyway, that's a side note.
No, it's important to note that though. But yeah, so I don't know whether this is true, but I imagine there's something behind it, because what he says was that when he's talking about the logo, they just say that he was inspired by Alan Turing and his work with computers, and apparently Alan Turing died by eating a poison apple.
Really?
Yeah, this is what they say in the film. So I don't know if this is actually true or not. So they don't actually mention the biblical Garden of Eden thing. They just mention the fact that it was all about Alan Turing. He took a bite out of the poison apple and died, and that this was the inspiration for the logo, which is kind of a... Again, I mean, it's equally occult.
Yeah, that could certainly be
could
certainly be a metaphor there, and
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know whether if that's the story behind Alan Turing's death. There's so much with his story going on, and one struggles to know where to begin. But I would guess that the poison apple story isn't literally true. I mean, you get the same story in Snow White, right? And the Seven Dwarfs. Incredibly occult story there. The biting of the forbidden fruit, the death, and all that stuff, and. So yeah, I would doubt that it's literally true. It's probably a coded Masonic metaphor that works on many different levels. I can't tell you how right now because I don't know all the ins and outs of the actual story, as opposed to the allegory here being thrown at us.
Yeah, but either way, it does lend back. It does kind of lean back towards the whole issue of this. Being a kind of a Masonic process or a Masonic film with lots of little occult references, and that kind of ties into what I was talking about before with the personal computing revolution and the identification with this brand and what that means, and how this symbol, this apple with a bite taken out of it, with the logo, big
instantly recognizable.
Yeah, instantly recognizable. You see it in, I mean, pretty much every film these days. If they're using a laptop, it's going to have the Mac light on it, the thing on it. And of course, you also have the famous marketing line which they use, which is "Think Different."
Yes. And I think this really reflects the true life genius of Jobs, in that the marketing side, the occult side, all the things that appealed to people on just like a primordial level, I think that he did understand, that he was in touch with, and that was his power. And every now and then you get a sense of that, and I think that he himself, again, in his speeches and whatnot, he would show you that. And for those who had the ears to hear, eyes to see, all that, they could see and hear that. Oh yeah, we know what he's saying up there in this coded language. So I think that's probably the real story of Steve Jobs. It's plain to see, and we see the effects of it. And yeah, the cult of Apple, the marketing, the power of the symbols have been imbued to this. Again, the apple with a bite out of it. Not only that being on the back of the computer, but it lights up, like a light up. And so there's so many like little details that. In this movie and any depiction I've seen of Jobs on film, he's depicted as this obsessive guy that obsesses over the details. I think he understood the power in those details, and he was trying to. And he's always shown as this guy who thinks of himself as an artist. So same idea. Yeah. I think that's very much true about him. And it came forward in this film. I think in other films they show that even more prominently, but I don't think you could tell the story of Steve Jobs without that coming through, at least somewhat.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Getting back to the Masonic issue, I mean, again, I don't know whether he was actually Mason.
No.
There are little sort of little anecdotal issues which maybe suggest that if he wasn't a Mason, he was at least initiated into some kind of mystery tradition because he understood these things so well. And when we talk about the incredible marketing of Apple and the kind of the computer revolution and the kind of the cult, almost the cult that they've created, we're talking about essentially like an alchemist at work here, because one of the things which is brought out in this film on a number of different occasions is that although they revolutionized the personal computer in so many different ways, they didn't necessarily invent all this stuff themselves.
They outright stole it sometimes.
Well, yeah, there's a number of
and all that.
Yeah, there's a number of little bits of script in the film where they're talking about how they kind of stole this and stole that, and then just sort of blended it all together
and
into
gave
this
it a
product
slick
with
package.
amazing marketing.
Yeah.
So again, we've got the whole alchemical concept of taking the raw, rough materials and blending them into something new, some kind of creation.
You can technically have the right answer, but it means nothing if it lacks the soul. All that soul and spirit. And that's what Steve Jobs imbued into it with his magical power. And it ties back to that Wozniak bit, Seth Rogen as Wozniak in there, where he's asking him, what is it that you do anyway? And, him as a composer, same thing. That's what he does. He takes all these technically superior things, which somebody else may have even come up with first, but he presents them to the world. And he shows them to the world in this mythic, iconic, archetypal way. And he plays on these archetypes in his product launch speeches. So that's very much that was the key to his success. And it's, I suppose, the Masonic takeaway is that is the road to success. True success is understanding the intangible, spiritual, alchemical aspect of reality and bringing it to reality, because those who don't understand it, they can technically master anything, but it means nothing because nobody understands that. Nobody is going to interact with it other than the person who created it, so it's pointless. You need to imbue spirit into your work.
Yeah, and that's something that we could definitely see that as being the case with Apple, because again, the whole emphasis with what he wanted to do in developing these computers and all the aesthetics and the marketing was to take something which he saw as being imperfect, in that it was clunky, it was sterile, it was cumbersome. You know what I mean?
That's what computers are by their nature. They're like a box with circuitry in them.
Yeah,
and a screen that lights up.
And actually, speaking of boxes, there's a I think it was in the film when he was with Next.
Oh, Next, when he's doing his next project,
yeah, he created that computer, which was a perfect cube, which I kind of found interesting.
Yes.
I mean, if you're talking about masonry, I mean, that's a nugget right there.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, so again, it's the alchemical synthesis of all of these raw elements.
Oh, you know what? It was a black cube as well, too. So like the cobblestone sort of idea. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
It's like yeah. But I mean, one thing I've kind of toyed with, again, this is just a very, very loose, unsubstantiated little conspiracy theory that I've kind of been toying with for a while, was, in regards to the whole question of whether Jobs was a Mason. I think that although, I think he's definitely an alchemist, he may not necessarily have been one, in as far as what we see with his life and his career and his decisions, most especially in this film, was someone who went against the grain in a lot of ways, someone who was a bit of a renegade and a rebel.
Yeah.
There were so many points of the film where he was given the word from upstairs in terms of like the board and his superiors.
He's
like Max
always
Scully,
antagonistic to the system. Yes, that's correct.
Always antagonistic. He was. They would say do this. He would do the opposite. They would say this is not going to work. This is impossible, and he would go and do it anyway. Yeah. They would say, you've got to mention this, or you've got to. Like a classic example was them, and this is a big falling out happened over this. Was them wanting him to acknowledge the Apple II team. So like they wanted him to pay homage to the previous computer and all the team and the resources that went into that, and how that was the foundation of what they're building now. And he was so obsessed about the current product and going into the future and leaving all that behind that he didn't even want to talk about it at all. And so that was a kind of a classic example of how he sort of went against the grain and defied his orders. And so and just quickly, you've got lots of little instances like this throughout his career, and then you've also got the fact that something I kind of picked up on was when he was first talking about the cloud, because he was one of the first people to really talk about that.
Yes.
without going into too much detail, he talked about it and what it would be and what it would mean in different terms than we're hearing now. He was a big proponent of it, but he felt that there were also risks there, and he was a bit more kind of objective about what it could be and how it could be used, etc. And so I again, a bit of a conspiracy theory, but I often wonder whether whether he might have been killed, perhaps, or with the whole pancreatic cancer thing, whether these health issues had anything to do with somebody higher up wanting to get rid of him because he had ideas and he had certain motivations and views that were incongruous and incompatible with the views of Apple as a whole, or in fact with the technology and computer industry,
the entire industry as a whole, and where that was going. Sure.
Yeah. And so again, it's all anecdotal, tangential, but it's something that I've wondered about that, whether perhaps he was somebody who was kind of outside the Masonic system, who wasn't beholden to the Masonic oath, who wasn't beholden to taking orders, and who kind of did his own thing. And perhaps he reached a point where they felt like, right, this guy is not playing ball. He's got far too much power and influence, and so we're going to have to get rid of him. Yeah. So nothing to back that up, but I've often wondered.
It's certainly an interesting possibility, and the idea of him as an outsider seems right. I think you might be right in that, really. Little things just pop up here and there, like you're saying, his views on the cloud and of privacy and how things could go awry and how he legitimately was concerned with that, whereas everybody else seems not to be. It's just everybody else has got the excuse, like, privacy, it doesn't matter, or we're not going to do anything wrong, and all the usual excuses we've heard before. They just throw them out to you, just lockstep. I remember Steve Jobs being quoted as saying that he didn't believe in philanthropy, like he didn't believe in it. I found that very interesting and telling when it comes to his peer group being billionaires. That I'd say that he was probably exclusive in that opinion, whereas when you're a billionaire, you kind of have to believe in philanthropy. But he I guess publicly said that he doesn't think that it works. I was like, wow, very interesting. Lots to do with that, but I think just a little clue that this may be the case. And if he wasn't a Mason or in the In Club, whatever it happens to be, he's a guy who completely understood how that works. And again, that would be the reason for him giving all these loaded, all these speeches with the loaded occult symbolism in it, in that he can do it without recourse. Because famously, Masons can only say so much about, what it is they're involved in. Sure, they can use coded language and things like that, but they can't reveal anything important. Like if he weren't in such a secret society, he could just basically do what he wants. You know what I mean? And he could use all that stuff that works at an occult subconscious level on people and just do it without fear of recourse, really, other than what the people who are in the in crowd are thinking about him and what they may do to him or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, actually. And I think it points back towards the little kind of, little theory that we're sort of teasing out here a bit. And just, again, another set of examples that may point towards him not actually being officially inducted into any Masonic group. Again, having, as you say, having a pretty comprehensive understanding of the occult and using that to his own advantage, but not actually having taken any oaths. So being able to talk about it as much as he wants. Just following on from that, I think whether or not he was a Mason, whether or not he was, heavily opposed at the top, and people had a vested interest in getting rid of him, I do think that his being a renegade and a rebel and sort of a maverick really assisted in building his mythos and building the brand and building the cult even more.
That's true.
So who knows? We could be looking at levels of intent that are even deeper than that. because that's kind of getting back to the whole Apple brand and the Apple cult. That is a big part of it. Is that the patriarch Steve Jobs is very much a maverick. He's someone who is entrenched within the corporate world, who lives and breathes that stuff, who is an entrepreneur, but who is alternative as well. He's a hippie, he's a vegan, he lives in California. You know what I mean? He's into LSD and Zen Buddhism.
He doesn't have any furnishings in his house.
Yeah, exactly.
All that weird stuff. Yeah.
So again, building that image, building that myth for the cult, and so. Yeah, I mean, how and why all of that came to be, regardless, I think it helped build that myth and built Apple and that brand into what it is today. Yeah. Which is again, it's more than just about computers. I mean, I've heard people talk about, and quite sincerely talk about how like Windows users are more likely to be Republicans and Mac users will be Democrats, and if you get a Mac, you're different, you're progressive, you're trendy, you're cool, and if you get Windows, you're kind of you're stuck, you're conservative and a little bit stupid, and okay, these are just comments. I mean, I've seen them in these focus groups and stuff like that, but. I think people actually, a lot of people actually do feel like that. I mean, just another thing quickly is what it reminded me of is, do you remember when me and you were up in Santa Monica and we went to Starbucks?
I'm trying to remember the Starbucks specifically.
It was like early in the morning.
It was in Santa Monica,
Beach.
Really?
Or was it Venice Beach? I don't know. We went to Venice Beach.
Oh yes. Now I remember. Yep. Yes. Now I do.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I just what was funny because I remember walking in there and just seeing all of these guys who looked exactly like Steve Jobs. They all had their MacBooks. They're all wearing like
black
board shorts and sandals and and glasses and sort of balding middle-aged men with the trendy. And it just just that image and that memory, it really cemented the cult of Apple because it's something that you see all over the world. So many people. His Steve Jobs image, his persona, his charisma, his kind of energy, his views have really influenced that brand and how people think about themselves, their relationship to technology, and how they think about the world and politics and all that in general. Yeah. So.
It's fun. Well, this is another example of LA being the epitome of being the best at buying into any kind of marketing. We love that sort of thing, or lifestyle branding. Eager consumers of that out here. I mean, this is where that thrives more than anywhere else I've ever seen. So, always
absolutely.
Funny. But I think we can leave it at here for now. Adam, what do you say? We cover this movie pretty good.
Yeah, I think we have. I'm just trying to think if there's any other little nuggets I wanted to throw in. I mean, I suppose, nothing in particular, but I think, again, the whole thing is very interesting, and it ties into some of the other things we've been talking about, with we've got a revolutionary figure coming out of California in the 60s and the 70s into counterculture, into psychedelics, revolution, with a...
Tying back to the real world, of course.
Yeah, and interest in alchemy and the occult, interest in rebuilding the world and a new image. It reminds me of that scene in the Doors film when who is it? The
Manzarek character?
Yeah, Manzarek and Morrison are sitting on the beach and talking about how they're they represent the new world and they're going to be an engine of change and
make the myths.
Yeah. Making the myths. There we go. Yeah.
Channeling Dionysus.
Exactly. Yeah. So all these elements appear in this film and throughout Jobs' life and can be seen in the brand, the myth, the personality, the cult that we have today. And I mean, we both own Apple computers. I'm looking at mine right now. I've got my phone.
I've been staring at the Apple logo the whole time we've been doing this. So it's like, oh boy, I'm like, it's making it very real. Yeah, it worked, and actually it helps me think about these ideas better.
It does, and as much as we can, sort of deconstruct and critique the marketing of Apple. I've got to admit that when I was, I suppose, a little bit less conscious, the marketing was very effective. I was absolutely drawn towards Apple products because of the aesthetic. Yeah. They're quite beautiful products. Very easy to use, genuinely quite reliable, quite fast. So yeah.
Fine product.
Fun product, and it also makes you again, just a little note. It kind of made me wonder about. You have people like Jobs, who have been at the helm of this whole computer revolution and the whole Apple brand, and we've sat here and we've critiqued what kind of a person he is, and that he was very, very quite aggressive, narcissistic, very, very ego driven, impossible to deal with, had problems in his personal life, but in so many ways it's like, well, that is actually the kind of personality that is necessary for something of this magnitude to come about. Yeah. And so here we are today benefiting from those we're benefiting from these products and the history of this brand and everything and what we're doing here.
Yeah, so it's kind of a message to the consumer, like, if you like Apple and all that, you have to be okay with the way that Jobs treated his daughter.
Kind of, yeah. There's the inference is kind of there, and if not, directly about how he treated his daughter, about what kind of personality, what kind of decisions, what kind of ethics, what kind of choices have to be made in order for something like this to happen.
Yeah, and very Silicon Valley, in that vein, that free market capitalism, the kind of things it takes to be successful in that system, the sort of psychology one has to have in order to survive in that environment. It's definitely a unique sort of psyche that is required, a flawed one. Yeah. Certainly by... if you're talking Eastern mysticism and Buddhism, you're not going to be the perfect Buddhist if you're succeeding there. It's in fact, it's completely redundant to do so. So, what do you think about that? Hippies who like Apple products?
Exactly. And I've seen this on numerous occasions. There's a lot of the Occupy crowd and people who are into the resist capitalism hashtag and all that type of stuff. You often see them ranting and raving about the evils of capitalism whilst they're using their iPhones and their MacBooks to do so. And films like this, it really bring you to ask the question. Well, if I disagree and object so strongly towards capitalism and towards these egomaniacal entrepreneurs, then I wouldn't be benefiting, from what they've achieved here.
I would opt out completely, and I wouldn't own a computer. I would just, I'd write letters to people. I'd go to the grocery store and use cash. Maybe I'd go up to the bank teller and withdraw money from my account that way instead of using the ATM. Things like that.
Well, this is it. I mean, so, here we are with all these products that we use and we depend upon to do what we do in so many different ways. And so this film was almost saying, well, how can you critique Jobs and what he's done and the way he's treated people when you're benefiting from that? So it's an interesting little quagmire, I suppose.
Sure.
And it raises a lot of questions about corporatism, capitalism, ambition, entrepreneurship, and all the ethics involved therein. So,
Yeah, definitely. I love those sort of things, and asking the sort of questions. Asking questions of oneself and how much we have a vested interest in things that we believe that we oppose. Or if we start deconstructing, we get to see that we don't really oppose them.
Absolutely.
That sort of thing. I love that sort of thinking. So another great talk, Adam. I guess we need to implore our audience to go to our website, tmpodcast.com. Subscribe to the podcast. Tell your friends about the podcast. What other things should people do, Adam?
Yeah, so you can do that, and also you can go onto iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and subscribe to the feed, which is updated every month when we do our podcasts. And of course, if you are wanting to comment or make a suggestion or just get in touch, you can find contact details on the website to get in touch with either of us, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Take care, Adam.
Okay, thanks, man. Take care.
Today's episode of Themes and Memes was recorded on the 27th of February, 2016.